Nigeria's equities markets continued in the red yesterday for the second consecutive session this week, settling the year-to-date return at 7.84%. Tajudeen Ibrahim, Vice President and Head of Research at Chapelhill Denham, joins us now for a midweek review of activities on the NSE. Tajudeen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Would you say the party is over? Because many have predicted first half we'll see a strong performance, second half probably flat, maybe even a mild contraction in terms of where the index will be. Now we've seen the results, and yet the market continues to go down. What's your take?
I think there are two factors to bear in mind here. The first is that the market was rallying ahead of result announcements. Yeah. And I think it's probably natural for investors to begin to consider taking profit on their investment. We've seen the case that on a year-to-date basis, we've seen stocks that have appreciated by more than 80% within like 2 to 3 months. So it is not out of place for investors to consider taking profit. That is one. Two is that I think one can also consider the closure date of registers of some of these companies that have announced dividends. So some of the closure dates spills into April. Yeah. So there is still room for investors to take on some of these stocks after taking profit to go back in there and see buy to qualify for such dividends. Yeah. So I think if we bear in mind also the fact that we've not seen all the results in the market, we still have, largely speaking, a lot of tier 2 banks yet to announce results. Yeah. We still have some good quality consumer names that are yet to announce results on a full year basis. With the likes of Dangote Sugar, for instance, not announced. So there is still a bit of hope around some recovery post the current pullback that we are seeing in the market, probably in April.
Okay, but what's your sense of valuation, though? And from the results we've seen, are they justifying the prices right now? Or would you say that the pullback is justified? Well, this is more a case of just profit-taking, and we could see some buying down the line.
Well, I think some stocks are overvalued as we speak, because in the consumer space, for instance, you will see some stocks trading at like 20 times PE ratio.
And the earnings growth is not
exactly. So how do you make a point for a buy recommendation on such a stock? That's one. Two is, even in the banking sector, we have stocks that have substantially lower ROE than the peers average. So the price-to-book valuation speaks to where they should be, naturally speaking. So you will not be expecting a positive repricing by investors on the back of that unless they deliver stronger ROEs. So as we speak, I think valuations are sort of fair, as they are where they should be, largely speaking, for most of the banks. But for some consumer names, I think they are just overstretched.
So if that is the case, the market appears to be either slightly overpriced or well priced, then really there is no justification for a rally in that case. So would you suggest that going further into the second quarter, that the market could even dip further?
I think we could see further pullback, in Q2. But what could serve like a catalyst is strong Q1 results. So if we see such results coming out and they come out very strong, then we could see that being catalyst. And the second also is around the macro space. If you talk about budget passing, for example, if they pass the budget and we begin to see some initial disbursements of money for capital projects, maybe that could also serve as catalyst in the second quarter. But as we speak, we don't see any catalyst that could trigger like a positive repricing anytime soon.
Right. And looking further down the line, in terms of events that could serve as a catalyst, we know that MTN is likely to list, maybe sometime in the third quarter. It's very unlikely it's going to happen in the second quarter. Could that be an event that could spur new interest in the market?
So MTN listing is a positive one, and it speaks to possibly some incitement or encouragement for more telcos to consider listing on the exchange. So when we have MTN listed, by valuation metrics that we've seen in the public domain around media, it looks like it's going to be like the second largest stock on the exchange. That's a positive one for the market, after Dangote Cement. Second is that there's a possibility that the federal government increases minimum wage. So they've announced that like 1 or 2 months ago, and they said implementation is probably like in the third or fourth quarter of this year. If those two materialize, then we should be seeing some additional catalysts to the market.
It's interesting you mentioned the minimum wage. It's interesting you mentioned minimum wage because yesterday my guest on the show was giving some interesting scenarios that he feels that all possibilities are on the table for the MPC because with the minimum wage issue, that is an upside risk to inflation and potentially there could be further tightening. What's your take on the MPC and what's likely to happen next week?
Well, I think the MPC for next week is probably going to be a hold decision, like no change in monetary policy parameters, because inflation, for instance, has not really moderated significantly to the extent that we can call for a rate cut. So we still have it over the MPR, for instance, and there is room for further downward trend in inflation. I think they would rather wait for the next 2 months before they consider cutting interest rates. But I think what has to happen in the market is a case where we have lower interest rates, but we don't have excessively liquid naira market.
Yeah.
In such a way that there could be an issue in terms of banks speculating on the US dollars. So they are still going to control liquidity, but it's not going to be aggressively to the extent that interest rates will be going up. So it will be more like a stable one, and probably after the cut, we'll see further moderation in interest rates. But that is not next week, in my view. I think it is more of like the next 1 or 2 meetings.
Okay. What's your view on the growth trajectory for the country, though? Of course, we are clearly out of recession now, and growth is picking up quarter on quarter. What's the outlook in your view?
I think we've seen good story or good development or outlook around growth. If you judge from the PMI, it is consistently over 50 points, which speaks to positive, GDP growth. And by the time they announce Q1, we should see a stronger number, than what we saw in Q4. I think for this year, we estimate 2.2% for the Nigerian economy in terms of economic growth.
All right. Let's leave it there. Thanks so much, Tajudeen Ibrahim, Vice President and Head of Research at Chapelhill Denham.